The Heist of Myth by Ethan Cragg. Good morning to you. At least, I hope it's morning. This tale you were so fortunate to find really shouldn't be read during the night. There are far too many vengeful eyes in the moonlit shadows. Just for me, mind you. You should be fine. Unless you've made a sworn enemy of an entire realm of mischievous half-spirits as well, in which case, set this account down and read it again as the sun is rising, when my greeting makes sense. It's the most pleasant way to begin a conversation anyway, isn't it? I'm just rambling again. It seems even someone as collected as myself is not immune to nervous jitters before a life-changing event. I'm more than ready to begin the final experiment, truly, but I will certainly miss having a body all to my own. I suppose that is why I feel the need to do this one rebellious act. Someone, you for example, living far in the future, should know of the immense sacrifices I have made, and the impossible tasks I accomplished. The organization won't like it, but I'm sure they've accomplished everything they wanted to do by now, right? Go ahead and answer aloud. I'm probably listening over your shoulder, and I would love to know. There is no time to turn this into some long-winded and bloviating autobiography, though it would certainly be one of the more interesting historical records in existence, so just keep in mind that I have already perfectly executed heists upon the treasure house of Heaven Nor, brought down the war chief of the Northern Waste single-handedly, and mastered almost every form of weaponry known to the men of my time. This account will simply cover my final and most magnificent achievement. This is how, in the very heart of the hidden forest, I kidnapped the newborn heir of myth. As the most skilled of the organization's agents, I was privy to some of their more advanced operations. The last few that I had the pleasure of carrying out had made us close allies with the king of the Aurorian Empire itself. And yet, this final mission was the most important by far. It was in the clandestine halls of our northern outpost that Master Malushan told me of the discoveries his order had uncovered, droning on in that rumbly voice of his. The purity of the creatures correlates to the efficacy of our domination over them through the power of the human will. Conversely, their strength dramatically diminishes when captured in a nascent state. For the purposes of the ultimate experiment, we must use an exceedingly rare creature without the obscurity of memory, yet with the potential of a Category 4 power. Would you believe me if I said he was the more understandable member of his order? I swear they only speak like that to desperately persuade themselves that fancy words will make up for their abysmal hygiene and pitiful beards. Such a creature is fated to be born under a storm-blood sky to the sovereign powers of the hidden forest. The stars themselves align, and the moonlight shall be tainted crimson, piercing through the rainfall. Within this week, you shall obtain the target and return it to us. I'm quite flattered you'd consider me for such a wonderfully important mission, Master Malushan, but I assume you've already tested some lesser agents in this already. Have all of them fallen woefully short of my example, or do you need something specific that only I can provide? It is unfortunately both, if you must desire the knowledge. The creatures are harmless to most of humanity as they travel in the shadows of the world, but they will kill with a fervent vengeance when anyone they recognize as a threat lays a foot in their mysterious domain. They can notice the most minute pulses of our flesh, regardless of darkness or disguise, but they cannot peer into the interior desires of the soul. You have much in common with these creatures in your whimsical infuriations, yet you bear more duplicity towards our enemies than our most loyal pawn. No one else could sneak by the Sovereign's defenses and return in time. He stared at me with his permanently dead, cod eyes, expecting the obedience I had always shown him. You will accomplish this task. I had to hold back a laugh at his expression. I don't know how everyone else is intimidated by that glare. With the lumpy folds of skin around his neck, it just makes him look like a poorly stored pumpkin. Nevertheless, I've never thought of betraying the organization. They share my sympathies regarding this unfulfilled state of the world, and they constantly provide me with the most interesting of missions. Where else could I steal from ruins beneath an erupting volcano one day, and duel a metal-armed crime lord to the death with a poisonous kitten strapped to my back the next? I gave him a dignified bow, smiling both to provide the grump assurance and in glee for the insult I had readied. This task will absolutely be accomplished, Master. though I hadn't taken you for the adopting type. I suppose you really have no other choice when wanting to father a child, given the ghastly growth on your neck that you call a head renders you quite unlovable. His face remained unchanged, but I could see just a bit of dangerous fire flickering in the depths of his eyes. That flame warms my heart in a way that is quite impossible to describe. When shall I depart on this daring and dangerous quest?
We had originally designed your departure to take place tomorrow, but as you seem to be so excitable, the mission commences in 1 hour.
I simply laughed in response. Of course, Master. I'd have it no other way. Oh, I've had a lot of fun with old Master Malushin over the years. However, I'm afraid this was the last time I will ever be able to talk to him in this manner. Things will be different after the experiment, and though I'm sure he will be overseeing it, he seems to have made it a point to avoid talking with me directly since my return. If anyone else from my time is still alive by the time you read this, I have a sneaking suspicion that it will be him. So if you see a vaguely human gourd with a foul temper and a hopelessly desperate attempt of a mustache, let him know I miss him, and that he might be able to make use of an eldritch concept in his pursuits called bathing. I hope, for your sake, you can run faster than most people. After passing through the secret gates of the outpost and rising to the surface of a charming mire, I was met by 2 of the organization's elite scouts. They're always the first ones sent to the locations of our missions, each one elusive and observant as a camocat. Though agents like myself are the true heroes, they do provide good assistance. I couldn't help but notice that they were unusually twitchy and curt when describing my destination. Considering the fact that 5 scouts usually brief me on the details of my missions, it wasn't hard to figure out why. The 2 frazzled survivors gave me directions to the hidden forest, and handed me a small cloth the color of a mirror.
This material greatly masks the aura of powerful energy, and we've proven it works on the targets. Keep it safe. You'll need it to escape with the air unnoticed. Above all else, beware of the Natureborn that guard the hidden forest.
Ah, Natureborn. For all the strange beings in the corners of our land, they are some of the most amusing, and a species I have had the pleasure of studying extensively over the past couple of years. Though they tend to remain in the outskirts of civilization, they love to appear to humans in their many changing forms. They are capable of speech, and seem to primarily enjoy playing tricks and rude jests to us. Yet they have never once harmed the object of their teasing. In fact, they seem quite incapable of it anywhere outside their distant domain. During the organization's recent captures and experiments on them, especially when rather painful measures were utilized, they did nothing but scream in many ways and try to escape. The cause of their extreme pacifism, whether the result of a biological oddity or a curse of some sort, is still utterly unknown. I've seen Natureborn take forms capable of cutting through bone, and I know firsthand that their supernatural agility and transformations make them difficult to pin down, so it's little wonder that the organization would have such troubles even observing their home. Imagine if they didn't have me. The other scout spoke quickly, with a wavery tone.
These creatures in the hidden forest are incredibly cautious and observant. They recognize our weapons even if made of wood or glass. They are aware of our intentions if we show the slightest bit of fear, and they will strike quickly and without mercy. I don't know how they are the same creatures as the mischievous spirits that we're familiar with, but they are.
And I don't know how you 2 gibbering cowards are the same scouts as the professionals I've worked with in the past. The little sprites can't harm you outside of their forest, so why in the world are you still acting as if you've a knife to your throats? It was all I could do to not smile at seeing the rage in their eyes. However, such infuriations don't feel as good when spoken to an underling compared to someone like Master Malushin. There isn't much fun in insulting someone who can't order your death. Oh well, it still had dregs of enjoyment. Raising his voice, the first scout snapped at me.
Listen here, dastard. They can see in pitch darkness, through trees and rocks, and for some godforsaken reason they spot you from almost a mile away. If it weren't for our brethren sacrificing themselves as decoys, we'd be dead, and you would be going to that nightmare forest blind.
The map he thrust into my hands was crude, but all of the coordinates and information were well detailed. All of these points were gathered as I rolled my eyes. Yes, point taken. I'll be sure to get a decoy of my own then. I leapt onto Palanquin, my trusty pangolin steed, and urged her ahead with a whoop. As she quickly clambered away into the mist, I called back to the scouts. If I fail, give my regards and will to the organization. Oh, and don't worry if there are any questions with it. I'll answer them upon my return. Though this account is itself an act of rebellion, I shall not reveal the deeper secrets of the organization. I owe them that much at least. The location of the northern outpost, their special technology and underground discoveries, and even their true name have all been omitted from this document, but my own secrets are mine to share, and every one is laid bare. One such secret is this. I have my own small outposts, scattered throughout the continent, each one containing various weapons and journals hidden away, and filled with knowledge that even the organization doesn't know. For example, in my missions to capture a few nature-born, I discovered that while they can sense up to hundreds of feet around them at once, through stone and steel and whatever else, this supernatural observation is quite limited in detail. Color and warmth are invisible to them in this manner. Only when seeing as we do are the details revealed. A chocolate rabbit is no different with this wondrous vision than a Coney's corpse. Carved matchsticks and twigs look identical as well. Or normal dirt, and my secret discovery in a far-off land which I've taken to calling Pyrosand. For all their mysterious airs and elusive transformations, the nature-born can be caught off guard and tricked like any human, and a sudden volcanic eruption out of thin air will do just fine in that regard. For the final time, I loaded my traveling bag with the tools of my trade. Matches, spider silk rope, my compass, and the jar of pyrosand left over from my last mission in Error. My traditional weapons were unfortunately a hindrance in this mission, so every one of them is left in that little location, deep within the unexplored regions of our land. If anyone were to find it, those weapons alone would make them rich beyond measure. As all my secrets are laid bare, I'll tell you where it is. 1 day and 1 hour's travel from the organization's northern outpost, and 2 days and 4 hours' travel from the western edge of the hidden forest, as the pangolin rides. In the location where those 2 destinations meet, you shall be most welcome. Good luck! The journey to the hidden forest had me travel over steep mountain ranges and swampy valleys completely untouched by human civilization. At least, any recent civilization. I could swear the last remnant of some ebony tower was poking out of a cliffside at one point, as well as a massive spherical roof overturned and mostly sunken in the depths of a far-off bog shrouded in mist. Though if they had belonged to a city, I'd think I would have seen more of their like. Oh well, I'm not a historian, and my thoughts were more focused on my target at the time, imagining what this hidden forest may look like. As I crested the ridge of a massive kingdom-sized basin, I was pleased to find my expectations not only met, but greatly surpassed. How to describe the hidden forest? Have you ever been to a desert during a storm? Well, moments before you are swallowed up in a blinding flurry of dirt, you can see a monstrous figure of wind, whipping up the land itself, big as a mountain and as wide as the horizon. A true titan of myth made real before your very eyes. Now imagine that dark wind is frozen still in time, and made up of trees and streams and clods of dirt going up hundreds of feet in the air, defying all reason and gravity. No howling of wind, yet every bit as large and imposing, stretching upwards and forwards, a kingdom-sized wonderland of woods dense and vast in ways you could not imagine. I slid off Palanquin and whistled for her to remain in hearing distance of our location. There was plenty to eat, and she seemed quite pleased with this final mission we'd both share. I took one single extra breath, a final preparation and composition of myself, and I moved into the hidden forest. The moment I stepped in, I could feel a sharp tug on my whole form. Every natural instinct told me to tense and latch onto the ground, but I let it move me with a laugh. I was lifted up 30 feet, and what had been a dirt cliff face became the ground right under me. I shifted my perspective and easily continued walking after being set down by the mysterious forces, now traveling alongside a small river flowing upwards. I could look up and see the normal forest I had just journeyed through resting upon the sky like a moldy ceiling above a blue void. How could anyone be frightened in such a magically beautiful place? I noticed a quizzical face growing out of a boulder, and I tipped my hat to it. It chuckled with a hollow rumbling and disappeared, melding back into the stone. Was it a guard of the Natureborn's domain? If so, I had appeased it. The mission was already going so well. After I was nearly 400 feet from the normal ground, I noticed the river beside me start to increase its pace as if it was falling forward. Almost immediately, I felt the same tug pulling me face first toward an upside-down trail ahead of me that stretched into the forest's depths. I leaned forward, executing a perfect three-quarter somersault, and landed elegantly on my feet. I smiled with satisfaction. I always love mastering a new element of reality, and this forest was no different. As I started moving into its depths, I felt my compass slip from my pocket, and it flew up towards the ground hundreds of feet above me. I snatched it out of the air and looked at it. The arrow was wildly spinning, completely useless, but the iron that ensnared it continued to pull upwards, ignoring the magical forces and giving me a sense at which way was truly down to earth. This would prove to be a wonderful tool, one that I used to make myself the master of maneuvering this maze. Venturing deeper into the forest, where no sign of the sky could be seen, I began to make out strange trails of sorts, standing out among the chaos and clusters of existence that gave reason, however slight, to the sudden shifts of gravity. I walked along it, whistling as I went, enthused by the fantastical sights around me. Trees would grow opposite of each other, brushing the tips of their green foliage together. Larger trees would bend and zig, sometimes zagging back across pockets of gravity, almost creating symbols with their unnatural forms. Rivers and streams moved like immense snakes, slithering about in the air before resting on land for a few moments, then pulling back into the forest. All the while, I was surprised to see how bright it was. The sun wasn't visible at all, yet it may as well have been just beyond the branches by my head. It was no harsh light either, simply a consistent warm presence that danced equally among the trees. Try as I might, I couldn't find the origin of that mysterious sunlight. I've since theorized it was an effect of the domain's ruler, but I may never know for certain. I was rather impressed with the skill of the Natureborn that watched me along the way. Were it not for knowing their telltale signs, a blinking knot of wood, or a slightly discolored berry bush, for instance, I wouldn't have noticed their careful observation of my every step. To think that if I allowed my heart to beat too quickly, or if I gave any tell of my focus on the mission, that they would likely kill me for trespassing. Oh, it was a challenge I couldn't resist smiling at. Occasionally, I caught a glimpse of an actual animal, usually a flesh-winged squirrel or colorful grouse of some sort, climbing about the oddly angled trees near me. They had no fear, often hopping upon my shoulders from some patch of ground or tree trunk above. I gave them tiny snippets of food and observed their movements carefully. They clearly knew how to move about this place, and did so quicker than any of their counterparts would have in normal forests. They did this by spreading out their wings or tail and surfing the edge of the gravity along the fine line between sections of the forest. I made note of this, and resolved to use this mode of travel for my inevitable dash to escape. It was about a half-mile into the forest when I encountered the first human I'd seen in days. Well, human is a generous term for the frail, drooling, unkempt slug of a man that lay against a tree, snoring happily as moss grew upon his rotting trousers. I watched him for a few minutes in silence, wondering if he was actually a Natureborn in disguise, when a squirrel crept down the tree above him and slid a grape of some kind into his mouth. He chewed in his slumber, belched softly, and continued to snore. I wondered if he was a hermit of some kind, and more importantly, considered the possibility of some sort of dark spell that afflicted the woods, one that might send all humans within into an endless sleep. I gave the sleeping man a light jostle. "Wake up, stranger. You must tell me how to get a servant like that. Or is the little fellow fattening you up? If so, it's doing quite a terrible job of that. You look as if a light breeze would blow you away." To my relief, he opened his eyes, muttering confusedly in Old Durlian. Fortunately, that happens to be one of the many languages I know.
Who are you?"
The man spoke with a creaky voice, one that might not have been used in years. "A traveler of sorts, here to give my respect to the king and queen of the spirits, and their soon-to-be-born heir of myth." I glanced back and flashed a smile to my hidden observers, who I hoped would be pleased by that reason. "What brought you to this forest, good sir? You seem to have been here quite a while." He yawned, and his stained maw made him somehow more unflattering.
"Peace and warmth. The Fae are kind, and the forest is quiet. I shall have rest for all my days."
How utterly detestable this man's reason was. To forego all potential gifts to the world you might give, To hide away in a remote corner of the continent to while away time until Lady's safe for the Pale Rider, or whatever anthropomorphization cuts you down to the void, it was a waste of life. I would make this man useful to the world, whether he wished it or not. I chuckled. Yes, you have an admirable goal indeed. 'Twas a pleasure to meet you, good sir. What might your name be?
My name? I don't remember. I suppose I don't have one.
I grinned and nodded, whispering, In that case, I dub thee Decoy. With a final pat on his head, I continued on my way, flipping up and down, leaping from one wall of soil to an upside-down pond, and back to a trail leading ever closer to the center of the forest. I carefully made note of the path, estimating how easy the escape would be when traveling back. After all, I only had 4 days before the birth of the heir, and so I would use them to the fullest, all to ensure that this heist would be perfect. A few hours of slow and observant travel later, the soft light of the forest dimmed to a pleasant coolness, and dozens of tiny points of luminescence burst into existence along the branches all around me. They appeared to be like fireflies, yet they had no visible form attached to the light. Like the day, these lights of night weren't harsh, and so I happily prepared my camp between 3 large trees which intersected to form a bridge over a beautiful pond sparkling with the reflection of the forest. My sleep is controlled as well as my waking self. This little skill of remaining perfectly alert while regaining my energy took a few years to master, a surprisingly long time for me, but that training has paid for itself many times over. I could sense several nature-born manifest before me, closely observing for any weapons or odd marks of identification. After a few minutes, they seemed satisfied, and many disappeared into the depths of the forest, returning to their posts. In the dark, I allowed myself a single grin. I had earned their tentative trust. The next day, I began to test the theory I'd crafted while watching the squirrels glide throughout the woods. Tearing my cloak in small pockets, I was able to turn it into a makeshift glider, basing the design off the squirrel's odd flesh wings. It would do absolutely nothing when used in normal leaps and heights, but in this realm of 100 different ways to descend, it was ingenious. I began to practice by leaping from the intersecting trees and gliding between the pond and the grove above. Once or twice I found myself falling short, but I needn't bother you with the details. You need only know that before the daylight faded, I could soar as well as any denizen of the woods. As I continued to perfect this new skill, I heard a voice speak to me, mocking yet inquisitive. Do you enjoy your makeshift flights, little pilgrim? I looked in all directions for the origin of the flippant voice. The almost childlike lilt told me it was a nature-born, and I was thrilled to have finally piqued their curiosity. I circled and bowed at the same time. What more fun could I have? The hours move by so slowly in anticipation for the birth of your heir, so I must idle away the time with something, as you all seem strangely silent. I waited for their response, straining my ear to hear them discussing amongst themselves in their twinkling language. The next words we'd exchange would be the key to the rest of my design. Not that I could understand what they were saying, of course, but certain tones are recognizable across every language. After a few moments, a small humanoid figure with a large pointed hat and piercing blue eyes leapt out from a tree growing beneath me, spinning with the shift in gravity to land by my feet. The creature narrowed its eyes and began pacing back and forth. There have been many humans of late tramping through our most sacred domain, eager to see the coming of our new ruler, and all of them have harbored evil intent. It pointed up at me, its form shifting as it did to a small imitation of myself. It was rather adorable, and just a bit flattering. You seem to be quite different. Are you, by any chance, a nature-born yourself, poised to remain in this restrictive form? I feigned a shocked expression. Why would you say such a thing? Do you think all humans are devious opportunists? No, I am an ambassador from Lugan, the kingdom of fair souls, fine wine, and uproarious laughter. We desire to form an alliance with the pure creatures of the hidden forest, and so I was sent over many a long mile to bring a gift. Of all the speeches I have made throughout my life, this one was to be the most important by far, and so I gave it every bit of effort I could draw forth, all while turning my excitement and adrenaline into pure artistry. Many more of the nature-born began to show themselves, and they feasted upon my performance, looking at me with wonder in their eyes. I came to this realm to bring myself as an offering to this child, a pledge of servitude, if you will, a living gift on behalf of my kingdom to yours. I swear upon my soul to obey the heir's every desire and whim, and in return I only ask that I may be near the child at the moment of birth, as a godfather." Nearly all the nature-born around me gasped and spoke excitedly amongst themselves. A soul oath of this kind between a human and a nature-born would result in the two being unable to renege upon their deal. Never before had they heard such a selfless bargain, and never again would they find such charity from a human. And all the while, they would never know of its snare. The promise I made, even when bound and sealed, would never have the opportunity to come to fruition. The heir would be in the hands of the organization, and as I would serve the heir would serve my masters. And I would sacrifice nothing. The small nature-born, who appeared to be the captain of this group, stared into my eyes, searching my soul for the slightest twinge of uncertainty or doubt. It was a test of pure will, one that would break any lesser man. And, as you are perfectly aware, I am no lesser man. Finally, the captain smiled and bowed to me before turning to his companions. "This one bears no weapons, and he speaks no lies, I say. Follow us. King Onivak and Queen Glacia have found you worthy, and will be pleased to meet you, man of purity." The captain shifted into an elegant white wolf, and bounded down towards the center of the forest, many of the others following along in a plethora of agile forms. I kept up with the lot of them with only a bit of effort while grinning all the while, my true elation perfectly hidden in plain sight. We soon reached the grand heart of the hidden forest, where I could tell my guides expected me to marvel at its absolute wonder. I was happy to oblige. An unearthly sphere more than 1,000 feet wide hung in the epicenter of the realm, untouched by any of the outlying trees on every side. It appeared to be made of a cracked gray stone, and inscribed with strange golden symbols that scattered themselves all about the massive surface. In many places, a deep crevice scarred the sides of the great object, and from those crevices an otherworldly light shone with the warmth of the sun and the brilliance of the moon. As I passed the final group of trees, I felt a strong force draw me towards the sphere, greater than the gravity anywhere else. 2 nature-born in the form of winged raccoons guided me across the gap safely. I made note of the width of the gap and the strength of the sphere's pull, and began to devise a way to launch myself through it when the time came. 50 feet further, we passed through a gleaming crevice, and one of the grandest sights of the mission befell my eyes. Upon a sprawling silver web of vines that stretched in thousands of ways throughout the sphere, perched a glorious and radiant golden dove, larger and more terrible than the greatest monument of heaven nor. It spread open its wings in welcome, and a cosmos of stars glittered in its feathers. A voice echoed through every bone in my body, reverberating among the shining branches. "We welcome you, child of divinity and dust! The oath you have sworn to us shall be honored!" My mind was racing with wonder, and before I could bow in thanks, I felt a rush through my very being, as if all my blood had circled through every vein in a single moment. Though I had never experienced the binding of a soul oath before, I knew it immediately. I managed to catch my breath amidst the cheers of the nature-born around me, and grasped the will to reply. "I offer you my deepest thanks, King Nonivak. May the bond between your child and my people be one that lasts forevermore." Oh, there was such majesty and splendor before me at that moment. It only heightened my resolve to prove that my skills were above them all. Over the next 2 days, I prepared in earnest for the night of the birth, all the while conversing with the nature-born, settling any final lingering doubts. Though they were intriguing at first, the conversations devolved into almost nothing but the birth of the heir, and how this was an era-defining event, and how the whole world was abuzz with excitement. And it went on and on and on incessantly. It did make me aware of just how afraid they were of an enemy trying to assassinate the heir while it was most vulnerable, why for the past few years they have guarded the hidden forest with such ferocity. I wasn't sure why anyone would try to kill the heir when it held such power and potential, but I didn't press on the issue. There was no need to bring up anything that might compromise the mission, and I honestly couldn't care less what would happen to the Natureborn afterward. Still, the royalty was something wholly different, and I tried to comprehend them while I was there. King Onivak was certainly wondrous, and his appearance was unlike that of any other creature, yet he remained as something I could feel safe in observing and estimating, despite the strain his brilliance had upon my eyes. However, staring upon the great form of Queen Glacier brought a sense of uncertainty that felt foreign to reality as I knew it. The great silver tree only became more faceted and complex the more I tried to follow the movement of her glistening branches. It was as if the whole of her material existence shifted entirely every second, growing 10,000 bows and reforming them with every beat of my heart. Nevertheless, there is no doubt in my mind that I could have made sense of it were I not focused on the mission. Due to the overwhelming nature of the royalty, I spent most of my time seemingly wandering the woods, secretly planning the exact path I would take during my escape. When they weren't chattering about the air, the Natureborn asked me many questions about my kingdom of Lugan, and I was happy to give them all the fabrications I could think of. I made them believable, of course, as several of the elder Natureborn still seemed eager to catch me in my lies. Or perhaps they simply wanted to best me in wordplay. I acquiesced to their desires, playing along and appearing an adoring fool as many times as was needed. Soon, even the most paranoid guard had well and truly underestimated me and my capabilities. Those that underestimate someone often feel a sense of pity for the poor sap, and will serve out of obligation. I used that obligation to prepare some of the more complex elements of my escape. The first was a method to escape the interior of the sphere and the reach of the royalty with the necessary speed. This required the use of one of my favorite tools. However flashy some of my other tricks are, spider silk rope remains the most consistent by far. It's strong enough to lift 30 men at once, yet 2,000 feet of the stuff only takes up the space of a good-sized cabbage. And yet, it's barely worth the utterly asinine price I pay for it. The organization gives me enough payment to purchase my own dukedom after every mission, and I am forced to spend almost all of it on my materials. There is no one more stingy than the Underleg seamstress, remember that. When I requested assistance with setting up a simple device that would lift me from the depths of the sphere, my watchers were happy to help. They were interested in seeing some of the ingenuity of humankind, simple as it was. I tied one end of the spider silk to a large rock, and had the rock move to the edge of the sphere's well of influence, teetering between two forces of gravity. It took dozens of the Natureborn to accomplish this, but they enjoyed doing something so exciting for the future godfather of the air, as they reminded me many times, over and over. Next, I slung the spider silk over the side of the grove that the rock teetered upon, letting the far end of the rope fall down towards the sphere, hundreds of feet towards the center of the forest. The end result was that when I would yank upon the rope, it would dislodge the rock. The rock would get caught in the gravity of the sphere, pulling the rope over the space of land as a pulley, sending me shooting upwards with blinding speed. I nearly had my arm ripped out of my socket on the first launch, but after testing it a few times, I was able to ride it quite elegantly. I was impressed at how many Natureborn volunteered to carry the rock back up each time afterward, though one of their reasons being that I look so funny when soaring into the air like a child who forgets which way is down, was a rather odd one. It rained the day before the birth. Like the Onivakian sunlight in the day and the Glacerian stars of night, the rain that flowed in arcs and spirals through the forest seemed an extension of the Royal Natureborn's power. A thin layer of water coalesced on the outside of the sphere, where it was flung outward into raindrops by the same force that drew me in. How these forces affect different forms of matter in unique ways is still a mystery to me. The rain appeared chaotic at first, but as the hours passed, I saw how the path of the water was siphoned into the streams, gorging them slightly, before they passed on into the extremities of the forest. This siphoning created many dry patches where animals made nests among the roots of the trees, resting during the night, snug and cozy even in the greatest storms. Snug indeed, the only way out of the nests often involved squeezing through a small entanglement of roots. It provided me with an opportunity for a perfect distraction. My pyrosand would activate if exposed to flame, and the matches I carried would light when rubbed against wood. If I used the entire bottle, it would almost seem as if a small flight of dragons from ancient tales had descended upon the forest. It would certainly be more than enough of a distraction if used on the far side of the sphere at the moment of my escape. I spent the last night quietly observing the animals, as the Natureborn held their vigil. To my pleasure, The small creatures lay as if dead, their energy spent from happily flying about the trees all day. The next step of my plan could be more grandiose than I had initially thought. As the final hours approached, I could feel a cold shadow lie over the whole forest, and the soft moonlight began to fade in lieu of a storm far stronger than any I had seen over the course of my mission. The Natureborn had all begun to gather here at the center of the hidden forest, some bearing the shapes of animals and humans from the far corners of the continent, and others in strange forms I could hardly recognize as being distinct from a mad dream. Had every Natureborn in existence come to witness this occasion? It would make sense, given the constant prattling I'd been subjected to, but it was still a sight to behold. Several hundred powerful and mysterious creatures, all sitting or perched on the edges of the sphere or resting upon the branches of their queen, and within a short watch, every one of them would desire my death. I carefully gave a few of the sleeping creatures in 3 of the nests a crown of scarlet twigs, as a custom of my homeland, I told the Natureborn, and spread a bed of black sand in their dens as the color of my royal family's blankets. Once everything had been prepared, I asked if 3 of them could leave to wake the creatures at the moment of the birth, so that the forest and my kingdom could celebrate as one. They were so enthralled by my false devotion, they agreed immediately. Perhaps all intelligent creatures, human and otherwise, can be tricked in such a manner. That may be why traitors are so readily despised above all others, as they reveal the truth that even the mightiest can be blindsided, that anyone can be exposed as a fool. If only everyone could understand how much of an effort must be made to succeed in revealing truth through betrayal, they would laud me as a hero. Maybe the people of your time have become enlightened to my virtues. That would make me very happy indeed. The storm continued to rage. The flow of water rushed even faster, and the soft light of the forest began to take on a red tint. It could sense the blood eclipse as well, and the whole realm buzzed in preparation. I focused on keeping my breathing and heart as steady as ever. The moment I had worked for was so close at hand. I was carried down to my prepared seat, next to a pedestal in the very center of the sphere. The spider silk had been set and tested many times. The pyrosand and matches had been prepared in dry nests. I could fly with my wing cloak as if I'd been born with it. Decoy remained under his tree, sleeping away. Everything was in place for my masterwork to begin. The red glow of the forest turned a deep crimson, and the light flooded the interior of the sphere. The whole species of Natureborn became deathly silent, and we watched on as King Onivak spread his wings and began to shift his form. His head and legs folded into his body to become an orb of light, and his wings faded until they were immaterial, yet they remained visible as twin tapestries of stars hovering next to the radiant orb. They began to take into themselves the full crimson light of the realm, turning the fiery king blood red. The waters circling outside began to bend into the sphere, creating hundreds of little typhoons swirling down into the branches of Queen Glacier, who reached for all of them at once. I stood upon the dais of the pedestal, utterly transfixed by the ritual, yet the mission still remained clear in my mind. Once the crimson light in the sphere had all been absorbed by the keenly orb, and the waters had fully filled the inner grove of the queen, a moment of stillness lighted upon the whole realm. Then, a great beam of light shone down from the king, colliding with a pillar of water that rushed up to meet it from the queen. A sound as high as a flute, yet as resounding and omnipresent as a firestorm's roar, filled the air, knocking me to my knees. The rush of wind above made it hard to look up, but I managed to, for just a moment. I cannot fully describe what I saw there. The light and water were folding into each other over and over again, in patterns that were ever more complex and wondrous, tearing open our reality itself, and revealing the full depth of the design beyond it. And within that impossible design, a single flame was forming. I looked away, my mind burning with fear and wonder, and took control of it once more. The sound stopped in a sudden instant, and the bright light faded away, replaced by the normal crimson tint of the eclipse. A small orb had formed around a shifting being where the rift in reality had been, and a great cheer rose up from the whole host of Natureborn as it descended slowly to rest upon the pedestal. King Onivak returned to his bird-like form, and he cried out in joy.
Now is born the heir of myth, daughter of Onevak Starborn, princess of the Grove of Glacier, and whisper of the infinite light.
Kept within the cradle of an orb, the princess shifted and danced within, like a white-hot flame flaring up, eager to take form but unsure how to do so. All the while, awe-filled voices sung out from every side of the sphere, weaving songs and voices coming from hundreds of nature-born and elegant forms. King Onevak looked on, an almost tangible wave of pride and dominion resonating between him, Queen Glacier, and their new heir of myth. I held my breath, my thoughts fully refocused from the vision I had seen, and my heart leapt at the sound of an immense and deep explosion, shaking the realm to its very core. Immediately, another followed, and the whole sphere turned their attention towards them. Voices rang out, furious and frightened alike.
Invaders?
Protect the air!
What was that? From the east! To the east!
King Onevak had moved between the cradle and the side of the sphere where the explosions resounded. As the third plume of bright ochre-colored fire erupted, close enough to see through the crevices on the sphere, nearly the entire host of Natureborn rushed to investigate. Even Queen Glacier's branches had shifted closer to it. The moment was at hand. As I reached for the beautiful creature, a sharp pain spread through my right arm, snapping me out of some stupor. I didn't shout or even flinch, of course. I could lose a limb and remain perfectly calm. I simply pulled my hand back, which now glowed with the same alarming light of the infant. Why I hadn't used the cloth first, I cannot say. I must have assumed that the heir would receive her godfather with ease, which anyone would have thought to be the case. Only seconds remained before my presence would be noticed. Even now the queen's branches began bending back towards us. I swept up the small orb with the reflective cloth, wrenching it from the pedestal, and covered it alongside my glowing hand. Immediately, I could sense the thoughts of the heir, still utterly pure and new. Words were still beyond her, but a deep sense of curiosity echoed in the depths of her being, pulsing from under the cloth, piercing my mind and threatening to dominate my thoughts. Though young, her effect on the world was already immense, even when dulled by the covering, but I had no time to think about it. As the heir's light faded, every Natureborn within the sphere turned their full attention back towards it. At first, a few of them may have thought I was trying to protect her from the phantasmic attack, as they hesitated for a brief moment with questioning expressions. That hesitation was all that I needed. I refocused my thoughts away from the heirs, and I yanked on the spider silk with my free hand, grasping it tight with all my strength. The stone fell towards the sphere as I had rehearsed many times before, and my final flight began in earnest. Earlier in this account, I've described the delight I feel when I see the rage in my master's eyes after a particularly biting insult. There is a similar sensation at the moment my betrayal is revealed to a target. In both, there is a realization on my superior's part that they have been exposed as a fool, an obvious shame manifesting before them. They see themselves, and me, for who we truly are. And so, this moment, 1,000 creatures, each capable of killing me in 1,000 different ways, realizing how they have been fooled all at once. I don't believe I shall ever feel such a glorious sensation for as long as I live. A cacophony of enraged cries erupted beneath me, shouting in every voice imaginable, and King Onevak roared above them all. His power exploded forth in the form of 1,000 beams of living light, but I had already reached the edge of the sphere. The air seemed to perceive the rush of the flight, and her laughter rang out in my mind, a twinkling of golden chimes. I burst through the barrier of water, the rage of the royalty palpable in the air around me. I felt a searing burst of light attempt and fail to ensnare my foot as I extended my wing cloak and began soaring through the screaming crimson woods. There was now no reason to conceal my heartbeat and my presentation. Every effort and spark of energy was now spent on my flight out of the forest. The slightest miscalculation in movement would cause me to spiral up or down to an unknown section of woods, and I would have no momentum to escape the army of Natureborn behind me. I would not let that happen. The rivers had become swollen with the storm, and my windows of maneuvering had become tighter than before. Many times the waters nearly converged to slow my motion, and I only slipped through with the edges of my cloak drenched. I hesitate to imagine what could have occurred if even a single Natureborn had not been present at the birth of the heir. My lead on the army had been maintained for nearly half of our way out of the woods. The blood moon's crimson light had begun to fade in place of the dawn, and the princess had begun to tire of the swift movement. She sensed my focus, and she began to worry for me as her bearer, her concerns stark and apparent in my mind. Had she already imprinted upon me, as a duckling would? I write about this many days after, and my memory is unusually hazy of the exact moment, so I cannot say for certain. There had been no chance to think about this at the time, but I do remember whispering one phrase at this halfway point. "Good morning, little one. Do you desire my safety?" She must have agreed, as I felt a wave of rejuvenation rush through me, urging me onward to reach my goal. How much more would her parents and guardians despise me if they knew how much she loved her godfather already? And maybe they did. The trees of the forest all began to bend towards me, moving in the unnerving manner of the silver branches of Queen Glacier. Did she have such power over the whole forest? It was no matter. With the heir's will, I was nearing the exit. And yet, even with all our efforts, the Natureborn had almost surrounded us. Decoy would serve his purpose at last. I landed next to him, tumbling to ensure the heir's safety. He was still asleep, even as the rain poured on his face. Detaching my cloak quickly, I let it rest upon his shoulders. His eyes fluttered open.
You again?
I responded by gripping his hair and slamming his head once upon the ground. He cried out in pain and fear, and I unveiled the heir's orb upon him. The light that burned my arm marked him along the chest, and I leapt off of the section of woods to make my final sprint, covering the heir once more. She seemed frightened of the pain she had witnessed, and I reassured her that I was unhurt. I sensed confusion from her, but it passed into relief. The glow of the heir's light illuminated the whole forest behind me, and I could hear the host of Natureborn descending upon the shouting man. A few might realize that this wasn't the same figure that they had pursued, but it would take them precious moments. The others who hadn't been close to me would instead take their revenge. Decoy's renewed screams confirmed the final and most impactful moments in his life. In the end, I had given him purpose. Only moments later, I saw the open twilight sky beyond the final stretch of the tree line. The Natureborn had resumed their chase, but Decoy had worked too well for them to have any chance of success. I smiled, nearly out of breath, and realized, almost too late, that one of the Natureborn had not been tricked in the slightest. A storm of blades manifested from the rocks ringing the tree line, converging towards me at a blinding speed. My years of surviving and constantly defeating master assassins and warriors were all that saved me from being torn apart, as I managed to dodge them with an inch to spare. They reformed into the captain who had spoken to me first, his piercing blue eyes radiating a primal rage beyond the capabilities of any human, communicating a pure fury with greater clarity than any speech could give. Without a word, my heart beating faster and faster, I lunged for the border of the woods, sensing the impossibly fast movement of a formed poleaxe swing down upon me. I couldn't dodge it, no human could, but how could he bring himself to strike the air? I turned the orb toward the blade, and the captain's strike veered off course, cutting deep into my flesh and separating my left arm from my body. I could see my bloody limb fly upwards as I fell with my compass down 20 feet to the solid earth, free from the forest. The captain screamed in rage and sorrow, and soon his voice was joined with hundreds more as they caught up to him, only seconds too late to stop me. Some tried to launch themselves from the interior of the woods in one final attack, but were halted, unable to harm me. Though the fall had been far for most people, even if they had all their limbs, I had handled it beautifully, spreading out on my back to dampen the landing. The air rested upon my chest, still safe and secure, celebrating in excitement that I had escaped. Her mood was contagious, and I began to laugh, letting out every shred of emotion I had concealed over the past week. I stood to face the army that had begun to descend towards me.
Oh, you foolish wretches! How could you have failed so utterly in saving your princess from me?
They swarmed about me, unable to touch or harm, yet begging and threatening me with everything they had. I ignored them, keeping the air clutched to my chest with my remaining arm and continuing my victorious speech.
You had the power of gods on your side, and yet your entire race was fooled by one little human. I sincerely hope you enjoyed my performance, as you will never see one like it in all the days of the world to come.
The captain who had taken my arm pointed his blade helplessly at my face. His entire form was wrought with utter despair, but he managed to cry out one pitiful sentence.
You take her, and the flames of our vengeance will sear you and all your kind for eternity.
I leaned forward, letting the tip of the quivering blade touch my forehead, and I stared down into his eyes. A wide grin formed slowly on my face. My, how it burns. With that, I turned and whistled for Palanquin, who trotted over, pushing through the surrounding natureborn. As I settled upon her saddle, the wails around me grew louder, and so did my laughter. I took one of the satchels attached to Palanquin with my teeth, slinging and tying it to hang upon my chest and under my clothing. The orb with the air fit perfectly in it, safe and quiet from the chaos outside. I was able to use my now free, glowing hand to staunch the bleeding from my new stump using one of the organization's cauterization tools that I'd left in Palanquin's storage to avoid detection. I had lost quite a bit of blood, but the joy I felt continued to energize me as if nothing was amiss. When they saw I had useful items in the outer satchels, and before I could even scoff, the natureborn grabbed everything else in them. My rations and navigational tools were spirited away by the desperate creatures back into the hidden forest. It wouldn't change a thing. I knew just where to travel, and my will to do so would not be broken. I set off, leaving the dread forest behind me forever, having mastered the deadliest place in all our world. Whatever binds the natureborn from harming us is a strong power indeed. Every day and night on the journey back, I could feel the sting of 1,000 eyes glaring at me from every shadow, voices shouting and whispering at once, begging me to return her, threatening me with empty promises, and attempting to confuse my path with their many forms. I simply jeered and laughed at them the whole way, comforting my goddaughter with calm reassurances whenever she sensed me begin to falter. I was the only thing she could understand from beneath the comfort of the reflective cloth, its veiling power keeping her people's voices silent, no matter how much they called to her. Each day I traveled further from the hidden forest, the weaker and more desperate the natureborn became. Any plants I could eat were snatched away right before me, and every animal was shooed by their wails and curses. When I tried to rest my eyes, they screamed in discordant voices to prevent my sleep. They pulled at Palanquin's tail, tripped her legs with twisting vines, and tormented her until I let her run free. She fled eastward, and I shall most likely never see her again. No matter. I held the air close, where they could not reach her, and I continued to put one foot in front of the other. Each time I started to stumble, I could feel the natureborn prepare to snatch up the orb if it fell from my satchel. And each time I began to lose hope, the air would urge me on with her concern, and I would find a new depth of strength within me, enraging my pursuers anew. I was only a half-day's travel from the organization's outpost, the mire itself within sight from a nearby range, when an event brought the full efforts of the natureborn to bear. I had stopped in a small grove to catch my breath, keeping myself from fainting from loss of blood and lack of food and sleep. Suddenly, many natureborn took form around me, taking on the appearance of corpses, splayed across the ground in all manner of violent agony. I had to focus for a moment to ensure I wasn't just seeing illusions from my wasted state, but this was truly their new strategy. I questioned their desperate methods at first. Were they trying to make me remember some of my more tasteless missions? Break my spirit in some way? No, the truth became clear when I saw the shift of smoke billowing up from a clearing a few 100 feet away. A small band of travelers had made camp here. Of all the unfortunate luck! The natureborn captain who had been so dogged in his pursuit stood before me. He tried to imitate the smile I had given him at the edge of the forest as some kind of mockery, then shifted his form into that of a bloodied child. He screamed, the cry full of fear and despair. Though it was simply an imitation, I'm sure his emotions were quite real. I knew what would happen next, and I collected myself once more. Soon, 4 men with torches and arming swords stepped into the grove, and they paled.
Help me! A monster killed my family. It's standing right there. It said it'll take me when it's hungry again.
The child captain pointed at me with a quivering arm. I must have looked a sight, still blood-stained from the loss of my arm, and with a fervent and animalistic determination flashing in my eyes. There was no room for diplomacy. The men advanced, 3 towards me, and 1 to comfort the false child. I was sluggish, but even now I would not fall. I had lost an arm and was weakened beyond all normal measures, but I am the greatest member of the organization, and I would see my mission to its end.
One man lunged forward and tried to run me through with his sword. I stepped to the side and grasped the blade with a hand covered by my sleeve. Before he could pull back, I kicked his hand, breaking his fingers and forcing him to drop his weapon with a yell. The other two swung high and low, and I deflected the blows with my newfound blade. One tried to call out a warning, but I had already slit his throat. I could have killed all three with that blow normally, but I was too slow now. The Natureborn's anticipation was palpable. They thought I would perish or stumble, and the heir would fall back into their hands. The heir, instead, would give me the final strength I needed. She sensed my desperation, greater than ever before, and she shone with the might of a star upon my chest. The world itself seemed to shift and groan, and the sword of one of my attackers turned pitch black, then faded away in the wind like a burnt stick. The other's boots grew moss in an instant, and stuck to the ground as a clod of dirt. In their confusion, I struck one killing blow, then another. The heir's light faded, and I could feel she was tired. A deep silence fell across the grove, one that stretched to the very souls of all the Natureborn around me. I closed my eyes for a moment, and laughed softly, no energy to spare. This was just a fragment of the power the organization would wield. I'm more sure of this than anything else.
Wizard beast!
I looked up to see the final man had traversed 10 feet in a second. I had no time to even be scared before he buried his sword up to its hilt in my gut. Looking back, it was a rather sloppy blow. The fool only grazed my spine. My responding strike was nowhere near as unrefined. As his head fell from his body, a great cry of both hope and anticipation rose up from the corpses. I gasped for air and coughed blood, but I was not dead yet. Clutching the silent air, I moved toward the now empty camp, one agonizing step after another with the sword still lodged within me. Any other man would have passed out from the pain, or fallen dead in the grove, but I reached the camp. I ignited my last possession, the cauterization tool, and I ignited the sheet-cloaked wagon the men had traveled in. It flared up within seconds, creating a beacon that could be seen for many miles. I slumped to the ground, arm wrapped around the air. All that was left was to hold onto life, and victory would finally be mine. The next hour in my memories was nothing but a haze. I am told that 10 scouts arrived within minutes, clearing past the illusions the Natureborn had set up by using helmets developed by Master Malusian which allowed humans to see temperature. They gave me liquid life to hold off the void beyond, and carried the air and my broken body back to the outpost. It seems my insults yet again served well, as the 2 scouts who I'd reprimanded led the rescue, desiring to prove their courage against the Natureborn. I will happily accept praise for my wondrous foresight. 2 days later, I awoke in the heart of the outpost. Most of our grand leaders stood before me, congratulating me as the hero of our age, the greatest of all the organization. Finally, the truth had been realized by all. I expounded to them about many of my feats within the mission, but saved some of the greater secrets I'd witnessed for myself, only to be told through this account. The wonder of King Onevak, the sight of Queen Glacier, and the birth of the heir are some such examples. They had scribes write down my abridged tale, so perhaps this incomplete story is now a famous one, told with reverent tone in the history lessons of your present day. Well, now you know the full truth beyond that unfinished work. The physicians of the organization are some of the best in all our world, but they could not fully restore me. I could be given a stiff and expensive artificial arm, but the final wound I'd received had weakened the connection between my lower and upper body. Just to sit up straight would be difficult. The defenses of the outpost were too great for even a Natureborn to slip in, so I could finally have some quiet respite. If I so wanted, I could remain here for all my days, basking in adoration from the finest bed. Yet to imagine that future filled my mouth with bile. What more was there in my life to look forward to? To sit in my own filth and rot like the Durlian decoy? What more could I provide to the world but useless stories that no one could be skilled enough to learn from? I could never walk again, not even with the best medical designs the organization had to offer. Worse, the Natureborn would hound my every movement outside, rendering all stealth impossible and all battle slanted against me. Without the heir to assist me, I would be vulnerable to an onslaught of new handicaps that even I would not be able to reliably overcome. As I began to wallow in my despair, I was given a message from Master Malusian. He had heard of my predicament, and desired to give me a new opportunity.
The air of myth is every modicum as magnificent and as perfect an element as we could have imagined, yet it remains either aggressive or listless. It yearns for its father in oath. Instead of wasting away in a respect unfitting of such a high and mighty warrior, give yourself, your being entire, to the perfection of the ultimate experiment. After all, there is no one more perfect than you to receive this gift.
I could sense a dark meaning within those words, but it didn't matter. Anything would have been better than being resigned to this useless form that is sitting here, writing down the last of these words in the waiting room under the laboratory. Master Melushin has remained silent ever since I accepted his request, so I can't even theorize properly. All I can do is write this rebellious account. I have already arranged for it to be hidden by my truest friend under my false grave that will be built after the experiment. This grave will be a monument to myself that the organization will use as an unattainable example for future generations. Of course, the friend I speak of is a figure who I shall never reveal. My secrets are shown here, not theirs. I only wish that even one individual might read this account far in the future, and regard me with the true honor I so rightfully deserve, to preserve the legacies I have left, the legacy of a master agent of the organization, the legacy of the one who makes fools of gods, and the legacy of a traitor, the most wonderful title one can have. So thank you, dear reader, for fulfilling my one wish. I couldn't have done it without you. A signature is smudged with blood, completely unreadable.